The finisher. I was almost thrown off the highway by a friend's friend. I am currently finishing up my ninth grade, and it has been quite the hustle. I've been diagnosed with ADD, and it is always hard for me to concentrate in school. I always find myself getting lost in my daydreams, and if it isn't my daydreams, then I am dozing off to my dreams. It gets even worse when I am back at my house. Absolutely no studying ever happens there. Whenever I need to study, I need to call a study partner over. But luckily, I have an understanding friend. He often comes to my home whenever we have any studying to do, or an assignment to write, and when it is over, the mother may come and fetch her, or my parents will drive her home. On the rarest occasions though, you will find that I will have to walk her home, and it is quicker over the highway. This was one of those rare occasions. It was a Saturday afternoon. Ever since early in the morning until about the afternoon, Diane had been at my home, and we were burying ourselves in our studies. My mind was feeling somewhat fuzzy by then, and I felt really good. I'd managed to concentrate for hours. I think my excitement must have leaked off to her, because I remember she'd been speaking loudly too, and laughing at the top of her lungs. We reached the top of the highway, and the cars flying past us didn't bother us, and I remember we were joking about how the wind from the car was an aircon that was cooling down our heads. All that jovial air was slightly lessened when we saw a small group of boys. They looked older though, probably early 20s, and what made them so airy was how they were all just standing there and looking over the edge of the highway, as if they'd thrown something over and were waiting for it to reach the floor. I tried to harden my heart and not look scared, but when something grabbed my arm, I jerked. It was Diane. She told me to go with her, and she pulled me. We crossed the highway to the other side and walked all the way through. I looked back at the boys, and they were all still in that position. All of them except one. He'd gotten up and turned to look at me. My eyes were still on his even as I turned the corner and disappeared. After dropping off Diane, I said my goodbyes and left. By now, as stupid as it may sound, I'd forgotten what happened earlier. I was back to my cherry mood as I was walking across the highway, but then I saw that there was a single figure standing down the highway. The sight of him made me realize that there was something I was forgetting, but I walked on anyway and pretended to not see him. As I walked closer, I realized it was the guy from earlier, but because it was just me now, I hadn't been smart enough to move across to the other side of the street. But I walked past him and nothing happened. So I was about to sigh in relief when suddenly hands reached out and grabbed me by my shoulders. Then I was pushed to the edge. I turned around and there was a look in the boy's eyes, a completely deranged look with a wide smile on his face. He was trying to push me over the edge. I fought as hard as I could, but he grabbed my knee and hefted me up so easily over the edge. My phone fell out of my pocket and I watched it fall all the way to the floor where the other car smashed it to bits, and that made me lose my senses. I screamed like I was dying, which I was, and tried to push him, but his grinning face and shiny eyes remained the same. And then we heard loud honking. It honked over and over again. The boy let me go and he ran off into the distance. He was gone. I climbed over the edge and cried like a little baby. I just had no idea why he had done such a thing. The people who were honking ran over to me and comforted me. One of them, a red bearded man, drove me home and helped me call the cops. But as hard as what I went through was, it's nice knowing that it has started a campaign around my neighborhood that will protect many innocent people's lives. The Looker. A friend and I were baited into a dark spot under the highway. This story is going to be a bit fuzzy. It happened a long time ago, and I was just a kid at the time. But it is scary enough, trust me. So back when I was a kid, I used to like playing with one of the neighborhood kids. His name was Tim. Tim and I would play hide and seek, and sometimes we would play tag. But one time, when we were playing tag, or maybe hide and seek, I don't really remember correctly. That's not the point. The point is that Tim ran into the bush and jumped out screaming. I asked what the problem was, and before he could answer, something jumped out of the bush. A white rabbit. It darted away, leaving us in silence. Tim and I looked at each other, and we immediately knew what we were going to do. After that, every time Tim came to visit, we would jump on our bikes and immediately go out riding into the forest. We would look all day for the rabbit, but most days we would fail to find it. Then there came a certain afternoon. At the time, I was sitting in my shorts back at home, and I heard a knock on the door. It was Tim. He was still wearing his bag, so he'd just come from school. Tim told me that he'd seen the rabbit again, and without missing a beat, I was on my bike, racing him to the place he said he'd seen it. It was an open grass field next to the highway. I remember distinctly that when I saw the location, I immediately swallowed. My mother had warned me over and over again that I should never go there, which was really unnecessary. I wouldn't have wanted to go there anyway. The place was full of these little bushes, and the floor was littered with plastics and broken bottles and all sorts of atrocities. My brothers told me that he once found paintings there once, and it was into that grassy place that Tim ran. I called him, and he turned to me, looking puzzled. That's when I realized I didn't want to look like a chicken in front of him, so I said never mind. I followed quietly behind him, walking on the grass floor. The grass was burnt black at the time, and I had to look to the floor so I don't step on a spring and fall down, or worse. But then as we were walking, I heard a sound from behind me. I turned around and asked if Tim heard that. He asked me what, and sounded excited, but when he saw my face, his excitement turned to worry. He asked me what was it, and I told him I heard something. He said it was the rabbit, right? And when I didn't answer, I could see his face slowly turn to concern. His eyes darted around me, looking at our bikes. And then there was a shift in his eye, and he pointed. There! I turned around, and sure enough, there was something there. It was the rabbit, and it was moving away, tossing up dust in the air. I know I was being dumb, but for a moment, all of my concerns were tossed out the window. I actually felt excited. I ran after the rabbit and heard Tim laughing behind me, but then the closer I got to it, the more I could make out what it looked like, and I noticed something. The rabbit was not running, it was sliding down the dirty road. That made me stop. Tim caught up to me and ran past me, saying I should come on. Thinking back on it, Tim was behind me, so of course he couldn't have seen what I saw, but I didn't realize at the time. I simply thought to myself, if Tim saw no problem, then I'd probably seen wrong, and so I chased, but it was at a much slower pace. We ran down the side of the road where the rabbit led us. It led us under the highway. It was dark under the highway when I arrived, and it was even darker in the shadows. But what really threw me off was seeing Tim. He was standing over the rabbit, but he wasn't looking excited. I walked around him and saw how his face was riddled with confusion and slight fear. The rabbit looked like it had been dead for weeks. But worse, there was a rope around its neck. I tried to pick it up, just to be sure, and that's when Tim let out a soul-crushing scream. I turned around, trying to understand what was happening, but Tim held my throat. And pulled me. I ran after him, not having time to cry about how he held me so uncomfortably. In fact, I didn't complain when I did have the time. I am actually grateful he did that, because on that day, when I turned to look back into the darkness of the highway, I saw something I hadn't seen before. the shape of a man covered in darkness, and he was looking directly at us, and in his hand he held the rope. The worker. I was tailed by a truck full of people, and they followed me into the highway. On my last vacation, I went to a trip overseas. I don't normally take vacations. I work in a job that can keep you working even in the holidays because it is a home job. But at the same time, if I do not work, then I will not get paid at the end of the month. So it is absolutely crucial that I find myself clients. And that was exactly what I did. But then, after I suffered a stroke, I realized that it was important that I take a break from my stressful life. So I told my parents that I wanted to go take a break, and they were understanding. They gave me money too, and so I could go to a vacation overseas. And simply put, it was amazing. I enjoyed the food, the beach, the sleep, and above all, I enjoyed the fact that I could wake up whichever time I felt. One time, I actually broke down crying because I realized just how long it was since I ever truly felt free. But unfortunately, it had come to an end, and I would have to return to my stressful world. I just didn't realize that the stress would arrive so sudden. On that evening, I ordered a car and started my drive to the airport. It was a fairly peaceful night, and I drove over to this particular beautiful view, showing me the lights lighting up the small suburb I was driving past. I wanted to see it again, and so I looked to the rearview mirror, only to see something else. A SUV was coming up behind me. There weren't any other cars on the street, only me and the SUV. But I didn't think much of it. I merely looked to the side mirrors, saw the view, and I drove on peacefully. I came to stop at the gas station and went to buy myself energy drink. As I was waiting on the line, I happened to look out the window, and that's when I saw it again. That black SUV was out there, but nobody from the car got out. Instead, when I got back in the car and drove off, the car immediately pulled out, and now I was sure of it. The car was following me. I turned into the highway, and I sped down there as fast as I could, turning and swerving in between the cars. In a much more overt way this time, the car just kept following me, swerving and turning into each of the highway lanes that I drove into. At some point, we came to a slowdown, and I remember it was the first time that I saw the car under the orange lights of the street poles, and so I could see in the car, and the car was filled with men dressed in black caps and black clothes. I decided I'd seen enough. I turned around the highway at a turn I really didn't want to take, and the cars followed me, which I expected. I floored the car, and the car chased me, but then, at the last minute, I swerved into a turn. My car drifted on the spiral down, and the wheels literally set off smoke. I was sure I was going to crash, but as if an angel pushed the car, it suddenly bumped into something and drove on straight without stopping, and the car that was chasing me never made it. It took me an additional 3 hours to reach the airport, but at least I reached it without any further episode. The friend. I accidentally fell asleep on the highway, and a terrible person found me. This reminds me of the time I went out drag racing with friends of mine. One of my friend's mother started a company, and she was making a lot of money back then. It was when he was just starting to get rich, and he was not used to the money. He used to take us out on parties, and he would call everybody from school. He became so popular at school, especially around the girls. But that's a tangent. Point is, he was loaded. So one time, he bought himself a Corvette C8, and he wanted to test out the speed of the thing. Heck, who am I kidding? We all wanted to test out that thing's speed. On a Friday night, we all arrived there in our own cars. It was at a highway. The Corvette was racing with any of the cars that they wanted, and let me tell you, it beat each and every last one of them with ease. It was so awesome, which is why it's so hard for me to explain just how was it possible that I was feeling so sleepy. I don't know, it It just was. I decided let me just sit in my car for a moment, and then I will come back out again. I walked to my car, and I sat down on the front seat. I was starting to get a hold of my drowsiness, but then I heard a loud banging sound. I sat up, wondering if the Corvette was alright, but instead, I noticed something. There was a tapping sound coming all around my car. It was raining. I tried to rub the sleep out of my eyes, but as I was doing that, I heard a tumbling sound, and I thought to myself that the banging was probably the lightning. I was still trying to get my bearings when I heard a rougher tapping sound coming from the window. It was a man punching my window. He motioned for me to roll it down. I turned on the car and rolled down the window. The rain started pouring in, but I was more distracted by the sight of the man. He had bulgy skin with bucked black teeth, and his grin was terrifying. The sight of him made me realize I'd made a mistake opening the window. He asked me if I was with those guys who were here, and he spoke with some sort of speech impediment. I said yes, and he asked me, where are they now? And I saw a glint in his eye. Hope. Also, I noticed that he kept his hand in his coat. By then, I was starting to become scared. I hadn't noticed that the others were gone, and nor did I know how long they were gone, but I couldn't have this guy knowing that. I told him that they were coming back. They went to fill up the Corvette. The man looked surprised, and he asked how I'd know. I was sleeping for hours now, and that did it for me. I told him they said they would, and I said, look, and I pretended to be looking for something. When he stepped closer, I punched his wrist, which was in his coat, and while he was swearing, I slammed the gas and drove away. As I was driving, I heard gunshots shooting into the sky, but by then, I was gone.